What is story? First, story is 4 things. Number 1, stories are the currency of human contact. This is how the world communicates. Seth Godin wrote once that a story is merely the shorthand we use when we talk about how human beings process the world around them. We don't process the world around us the way computers do. We do it with narrative. Every major form of philosophy or religion, every complex belief system has been translated through stories and parables. Robert McKee said this about stories being the currency of human contact because he's the number one consultant in script writing to Hollywood. And many, many people have been, some of the most famous producers and directors have been to his seminars on story. But Robert McKee said that's the currency of human contact. Jane Hirschfield said, the mind before it can enter a new perception needs first to extend itself into existence in tangible ways. What does she mean? Well, story and myth and narrative is both a window and a mirror. Immediately and intimately, we sort of personify story. As you're reading a novel, as you're watching a story unfold on the screen, you are also putting yourself into the role of the protagonist. So you not only see a story unfold on the outside, but you see yourself within images of the story. So the story is personal and universal. It's ecumenical as well as intrinsic. It's for everyone. Storytelling number 3 is also simply a heuristic. It's a mental shortcut. It's a bridge. This is going to be a fantastic key to unlock those of you who are in a complex business. What I love about storytelling is I don't care if you're the most advanced salesperson on the team or marketing professional. I don't care if you founded the company, you know everything about it. I don't care if you're in a complex business like neuroscience or whatever it might be. The entry-level salesperson and the most sophisticated salesperson in terms of tenure and experience both start on an equal playing field. They both have to return to the elemental facts of story. And the harder your sell is, the more complex your product is, the more you need this heuristic, this mental shortcut or this bridge to help unpack what it is that you do. Ira Glass said that narrative is like a back door into a very deep place inside of us, a place where reason doesn't necessarily hold sway. And finally, the 4th thing that story is this enunciation that breaks into the small house of our cautionary being. The enunciation that breaks into the small house of our cautionary being. This means that we can be typically cautious, but somehow story is able to break through. Story is able to break through. What we have to do as marketing professionals is to bring everything from our world that we are consuming in entertainment into the business world. A lot of folks will stop when they come to their business and they forget that intrinsically they're already carrying so many magical things about story inside of them. So we have to sort of escape the world of marketing speak and language like that to return to the world of entertainment. Because you already are processing some amazing things. Look at what's happening around you in the world of story. I mean, genres are changing. There are some fantastic things going on in the world, for example, of graphic novels. Like the graphic novel is a great way to tell a story. You probably didn't come to this seminar, the webinar today to think, I'm going to tell a better story, but I could use a graphic novel as a way to do it. But graphic novels have exploded in terms of popularity. Also, we all know this, podcasts and telling a story through podcasts in a serial format have been immensely popular. We are watching more and more short films. We're watching more and more documentaries, which, by the way, as an aside, a documentary is one of the master classes in perspective, because a documentary is always told through the perspective of someone or multiple people. We are also processing micro stories. If you're in Spotify and you see the little videos that are popping up for songs now, that's just like like seconds long, but they tell an interesting little story in just a snippet. And finally, of course, we're all Netflix binging. When folks come to me and say, Bobby, I don't think people have the time to process a story, I like to ask them about their own consumption habits. Really? How many hours have you spent watching, binging your favorite show? So we are processing all kinds of stories. There's not a right way or a wrong way to do it. There's just so many options. That's actually part of the problem, is that we have a lot of options. But today what we're going to do is we're going to unpack 6 secrets about storytelling. And I'm going to show you 4 different short story shapes. The idea is for me to present so much material to you that you can walk away with 2 or 3 big keys that will unlock what you are doing in terms of story. Secret number 1. And I got this from Nike. It was privileged to go tour their headquarters. And I was talking with their marketing director who showed me this slide. and said, here are our 10 go-to-market principles. And the number one principle I loved seeing, of course, was that they said, we tell stories to connect product to athletes and authentic experiences for our consumers. Now, what does that look like? Ralph Lauren and Tory Burch both said that we're not in the fashion business, but we're in the storytelling business. But what does connecting our product to authentic experiences look like? Here's an example.
Greatness, it's just something we made up. Somehow we've come to believe that greatness is a gift reserved for a chosen few, for prodigies, for superstars, and the rest of us can only stand by watching. You can forget that. Greatness is not some rare DNA strand. It's not some precious thing. Greatness is no more unique to us than breathing. We're all capable of it. All of us.
Now, to me, here's the magic. Here's what Nike does. Here's what Adidas does. Here's what Peloton does. The best product stories connect the product to the user's experience, but let's not stop there. What they also do is they connect the product to the aspirational self, the person inside of us that we want to become. I learned this through Xander Nethercutt, who wrote an article on Medium. He's a great writer. And I loved it so much. I just had to keep talking about this article. That people really don't buy products. They buy better versions of themselves. That's exactly what we're seeing in the video. And that's exactly what we need to unpack as we tell better stories. We need to ask ourselves, who is our customer? Not the personas, the individual. We've all done persona work. We know what a persona is, but I'm asking you to get to the individual. What does the individual want? What does our individual customer want to be? And how do we help them get there? Answering some of those questions will unpack some fantastic storytelling, just like that greatness that's within you. I love the fact that Nike, they're known for highlighting super athletes, but what we don't really see, because it flies under the radar, is they really highlight the average athlete who aspires to the greatness within them. And that just gets me excited no matter what it is that you sell. And here's the cool thing. Vonnegut said he had these rules for storytelling, and he said every character should want something, even if it's just to get a glass of water. That's a secret in our storytelling that we can unlock. Peloton does this really well with the same building community around their brand, but they also, and this was something I added just at the last minute, they also have something called a tribal signifier. Right? You're a part of the community. You're a part of the passion. Again, they're appealing to the greatness within you. Look at that infinite you. All of this is marketing done on purpose, language done on purpose that I love. But by using the hashtag Wear Peloton, they're actually also forwarding or creating this sort of community-driven story aspect, so that the pinnacle for us as marketers is to get other people telling the stories about your product through their experiences. And that's what I love about a tribal signifier. So those are two of my favorite tips. One is appealing to the greatness within you. And then number two, the tribal signifier. Enchanting secret number two. Storytelling is about problem solving. So when we have folks say, I just need to learn how to tell better stories, we don't necessarily start with a narrative shape. We talk about what problems are you trying to solve for your customers? Because if you can solve the problem, you'll find the story. This is a tip I got from George Saunders. And it was a brilliant short story writer, which, by the way, short stories are great places for you to exercise your storytelling muscle. Here's a simple story shape that I wanted to share with you that you could storyboard with you and your team to simplify the complex problem of how do we tell this story. Look at what Pixar does. I want you to imagine in your mind your favorite Pixar movie. And when you do, got it in your mind, I want to show you how this shape that I'm going to show you this pattern fits every story that they have. Okay. Number one, once upon a time, there was blank. Every day, blank, right? Once upon a time, there's a cowboy doll. Every day, Andy played with Woody, the cowboy doll. One day, space toy arrives. Because of that, blank. Because of that, blank. Until finally, blank. If Pixar can use this as a way to jumpstart the most creative storytelling in the world, I think we can use this with our customers as we think about what it is that they are going through. That's a story shape, that one of four story shapes I want to share with you today. Also, something that we need to think through is point of view. There's all kinds of point of views that we can take. Are you telling the story of the business from the point of view of the founder? There are times that we need to pivot to telling that story. There are times when we need to pivot to telling the story of the customer. But point of view is everything. Perspective is everything in storytelling. This is why you love first person stories, or why you might like Jane Austen and her work. Third Person Limited is told about Gatsby through the perspective of another person. So there's lots of options for us as storytellers. And what Anne Hanley says is make the customer the hero story. This is where most people should start. And what I want to show you the difference. There's no audio on the commercial that you're watching. It's just me talking over the top of it. And then on the left, you're seeing marketing done around a product specific marketing. On the right, you're seeing the customer as a hero. It's so subtle. And Apple, of course, they're geniuses at this, but it's so subtle that they're showing the customer as the hero story. You know what you're doing? You're doing that thing with the window and the mirror where you're putting yourself in the place of the protagonist, of the person in the story. That's you running by the lake. That's you eating with your friends. That's you jumping on the bed. That's you participating in it. That's why it's so engaging and so compelling. All right. Secret number 3. Storytelling is transformational versus transactional. Storytelling is an evolution. It's something that we're watching as someone evolves. It's something we're watching as someone evolves. One of the reasons why case histories were so boring is because we weren't telling the emotional journey that the customer was going through. We got the good structure of who, what, when, where, why, and how because we're good journalists. But to become a journalist that tells a great story is when we impact the world with emotion and we show the emotional journey and the transformation that the customer went through. And then to get to this part, we start with the problem and not the product. Again, back to Saunders saying that storytelling is problem solving. My friend Mark Graham actually came up with this phrase: start with the problem, not the product. So stop the features and benefits selling, and let's think through what the customer is trying to solve. Where are we trying to move them? This list is from Nancy Duarte. From disinterested to intrigued, from doubt to belief, from exhaust to energize. This is really good, hard work we're doing behind the scenes as we tell stories. Now, one more shape of a story I want to share with you, and that's the monomyth. Actually, 2 of 4 that I want to share with you, and that's the monomyth. Most of you have probably seen the hero's journey, but I want you to think of your favorite story, period. Favorite story. Star Wars and Little Mermaid, if you can't think of anything else. But the monomyth and the hero's journey is something that we don't have time to unpack in this webinar today, but I wanted to show it to you because you can Google this and do a little more homework. When we do workshops, actually, we do a half day and a 2-day workshop. And I love this. We unpack this a lot. We just get into every single one of these details about what it is to get to the heart of your story. But what I want you to see are a couple things. This is a complex chart, but I want you to see that the client is the hero, and typically they receive a call to adventure and they encounter you. The 2 or 3 things I want you to see here is that you are not the central part of the story. You are the supernatural aid. You are Glinda the Good Witch. You are Haymitch. You are Obi-Wan Kenobi, helping Luke Skywalker leave the known world, go into the unknown world. Think if you were selling a multi-million-dollar database server product, or if you were selling an ERP. You have a client who has a real big journey to go through, right? They're going to leave the world that they know and they're going to go into the unknown world. That's an interesting pattern to lay over what every customer has been through, no matter what it is that you sell or do. So I encourage you to check that out. Hero's Journey has encouraged storytellers. Joseph Campbell has inspired so many storytellers, from George Lucas to Steven Spielberg. And if it's good enough for them, I think it's probably good enough for us too. So that's another shape that I wanted to share with you today. Secret number 4. The real secret for businesses, particularly for those of you that showed up today and you're in the B2B world, is that the energy around the story, the momentum, has to do with motion and meeting. And here's what I mean. George Saunders has another quote that I love. And when I read this, you can see every story that you've ever enjoyed in this quote. And that is that the energy of the story is stored in our hope. Remember what Vonnegut said about every character just wants something. The energy of the story is stored in our hope. We want that character to come through. We want them to win. Think of the last 2 or 3 great movies that you saw. And think of how the energy of that story you were a part of the energy of that story. because you are important in that story to bring it forward. You are part of that excitement around it. The energy of a story stored in our hope. Now, how does that happen? Vonnegut also says that there are basically only 2 or 3 story shapes. And that is kind of comical. It's a little tongue in cheek, but it's also very true. Man and whole. You have the good fortune, ill fortune. You have the beginning and the end. Person gets into a little trouble, gets out of trouble. That's the end. You have the emotional apex, you have emotional nadir, and you have many emotional steps in between. Now, the reason why I show this to you is because remember what I said about the energy of the story is stored in our hope. When we make the customer the hero of the story, when we understand what problem they're trying to solve, when we understand what world they are trying to fix, where they're trying to arrive, and we understand that they are trying to become a better version of themselves, then we can see that we can unpack that step by step and find the energy of the story. One of our favorite stories, boy gets girl, meets girl, loses girl, gets the girl back. Who doesn't love that story? It's a great story. Again, energy is carried along. This is all problem solving. What I encourage you and your team to do is that when next time you are approaching the idea of storytelling is to just do a session just where you're thinking through the shapes of the stories that you're going to tell, because it's a great way to simplify and storyboard your ideas. Remember, the energy of the story is stored in our hope. This American Life, there's probably many fans of This American Life, but they were obviously icons in creating amazing stories via audio. And I want to show you their story shape. This is what they say are the 3 integral components of all of their stories. Now, if you're like me and you've listened to This American Life before, you're probably halfway through a story, and you're going, why in the world am I listening to this story? Right? So you're listening to This American Life. It's a story about used car dealers. It's a story about calamari, whatever it might be. Here's why you're listening to this story. Okay. I turned my camera back on. Thanks, Matt. I'll come in and out in case there's something I need to show you on the screen. 3 things they said. Number 1 secret was action. That everything is a compelling sequence of actions that compel the story forward. Number 2, they said they always have a moment of reflection in their story. This is kind of an interesting thing, because when you're thinking about a story with your customer, for example, that they have this journey they need to go through. And what happens often is they'll say, wasn't quite sure if we were going to make it on the other side. I wasn't quite sure if we were going to make payroll. I wasn't quite sure if this change was really going to change our company. There's a moment of reflection as you're listening to the storytelling by This American Life that has this, that is an important part of the story. This is that empathetic moment. This is that moment where we connect with them. This is that moment where we're looking out through the window and we see a version of ourselves in some of these characters. And then there's always something at stake. This is the bait, right? This raises a question. There always must be something at stake in every single story. We can tell you the simplest story. I can tell you right now, the simplest story, and there's always something at stake in it. Okay. Enchanting secret number 5. Enchanting secret number 5. Excuse me. Get some water. Brands are symbols. And what brands really are symbols in the mind of the buyer and the consumer and the customer is brands are symbols of emotion. We think about Apple and what emotion they are, what they exude. What does your brand exude? How do people feel when they encounter your product, when they experience your product? How do they feel when they buy that product, when they use that product, right? I'd love to go through this exercise with brands because I like to remind them that there's the arithmocracy of the boardroom. That's a term that was created by Rory Sutherland, who talked about the fact that businesses typically make decisions in the boardroom using sort of this arithmocracy of numbers rather than emotions. And yet I love to talk to financial people because I love to ask them, your last purchase, your house and your car, your last 2 big purchases, house and car, was that an emotional decision? Or is that a rational decision? 9 times out of 10, it was an emotional decision, or it was mostly emotional and somewhat rational. We bought a safe car. That's an emotional decision. We bought a car because it's cool. That's an emotional decision. So there's lots of things around emotion and brands that we can unpack. And Starbucks sells a commodity. That's what's interesting about Starbucks is that they sell one of the world's oldest commodities, coffee. And I love what Howard Schultz said, that emotional connection is their true value proposition. That blows my mind. Why are you buying coffee that costs 10 or 20 times what you can make at home. It's because of that emotional connection. No matter what city you go into, no matter where you visit, a Starbucks experience is the same. And you sort of feel like, a little bit like, you step back into your home. The other thing that I want to stress today, this is probably one of the most important parts, and that is that the flame of the story is emotion. Without emotion, your stories are a boring case history. And again, I don't care what you sell. This is vitally important for what you do. Because when you look at how the world communicates, this is how they communicate. They're communicating through emotion, through emojis, through animated GIFs. This is how our world talks today. This is the primary language. And no matter where you're from, you understand it. Why? Because emotion is a language that we all speak. If you are an entrepreneur and you're in the cupcake business, the language that you choose, this is why marketers are vitally important as we move forward, particularly as we come out of the past year that we've all been through and we move forward into a new year. People are wanting deep meaning. People are wanting their product, what they buy, to mean something. What we sell matters, but how we communicate what we sell matters. If you're in the cupcake business, to oversimplify this, what do you sell? Do you sell cupcakes? If you tell someone you sell cupcakes, you commoditize yourself. Butter, sugar, flour, got it. Okay, I understand the cupcake business. Or do you sell happiness in a cup? I know there's pros on this webinar and you kind of don't need this stuff. It's basic, but the basic stuff is the most important element. Without emotion, we don't have a story. We don't have a story. Wittgenstein said it this way: the limits of my language are the limits of my world. My mother is named after one of the most famous storytellers in the Chickasaw Nation, and her name is Teata. And her dad said to her that stories are like ragweed, though the branches spread out this way and that. They all come from the same root. That same root, and the root that we need to tap into, is empathy. That root is empathy. That's the thing we need to work really, really hard at. And if empathy is important, shouldn't we know exactly how our customers feel? If empathy is important, which means we've got to do a little hard work. Sorry about all the words on the page. I'm going to read the important parts. But this is from Martin Weigel, head of planning at Wieden+Kidney. I love this quote: whatever Plato and Descartes may have told us, whatever marketers might tell themselves, we are at our core driven, not by reason and choice, but by far more ancient, intuitive, and irrational emotions, impulses, and instincts. If you want to move people's behaviors, you have to emotionally move them. It's a great quote. Remember that words are tools. We have to build our language toolbox around what we're doing. That means we have to go back and not map the customer journey in terms of practical steps of what they did next. We do have to do that for storytelling, but what we really have to unpack is, have you ever done a map of your customer's emotional journey? Have you ever said, let's predict how our customers felt pre-launch or before they used our product, when they were using the product or implementing or using the product, and then post? Because you can unpack a whole host of emotions. There are 6 primary emotions, but look how many secondary and tertiary emotions there are. Words are so important. If someone walks into my office and says, we have a customer that's very angry, that angry is a very important word. We have a customer that's irritated. Do you see how our words and emotions make such a difference? And I think it's worth it for you and your team to unpack exactly how your customers feel as they go through all of these experiences. All right, secret number 6. Secret number 6. Storytelling is editing. This is the honor, but I assure you it's the most important tip that I could share with you today, is that storytelling is editing. Scott Momaday is another of my favorite Native American authors. He's a Kiowa Indian, and he was the first Pulitzer Prize winning Native American author. And he said that all things can be accepted if not understood, if you put them into story. Ocean Vuong, in a podcast interview with Krista Tippett in On Being, he said that oral stories, the stories that traditions have handed down to us, get edited over time. So even the stories we think are spontaneous get edited over time. So by the time they arrive, they're actually a more pure form of storytelling than they were when they began. You are marketing professionals. You all know what a rough draft is like. You all know that process and that experience. Our storytelling has to go through the same refining process. In fact, when you look at oral storytelling, think about your family or going around a holiday and coming back every year. What happens in families, and I love to unpack this too as we work through workshops, is to talk about your experiences and what you have, how your life has been enriched by story. Typically around holiday gatherings, people will tell the same stories over and over. It's become a part of lore or myth or something in your family has been carried on, and it's been refined every year until it gets perfect as in the telling. It's the same story all the time. I love it, right? That we love that. But editing is so powerful. This is a video. There's no audio on this, but Jerry Seinfeld, this is him talking about a Pop-Tart joke that he worked on for 2 years. Now, a lot of his jokes come to him spontaneously, but really most of his craft is hard work. We all know this. If you study the comedians in the world, a lot of their work looks and feels spontaneous, but it's a lot of editing. It's a lot of editing. This is why we have to be careful with storytelling. We think that it should be simpler than it is. It is both simple and incredibly difficult because creativity, because it comes across spontaneously, because that video that we watched is a spontaneous experience, because we have an emotionally spontaneous experience, we think that creativity should come the same way. It doesn't. Inspiration doesn't show up that way. Inspiration shows up as overalls and hard work. We know that about creativity. Italo Calvino, the Italian author, said that spontaneity is an impression which the work conveys, but that doesn't mean you can achieve the result by spontaneity. This has probably been the biggest lesson I've learned interviewing customers, because when you interview a customer, you're typically not going to get a linear story. People don't talk in linear patterns because we don't walk around with a final cut in our heads. We're processing a lot of what we're thinking out loud. And so one of my favorite tactics has been to record a customer interview. And if it's written, for example, and then edit that for the customer, splicing pieces of the story where they fit better in the narrative and send it back. I have never had a customer disagree with the story that I've written about their experience when I've sent to them and said, we recorded this and you were just sharing with the story with me spontaneously, but I refined this for the page and I want you to see. And they almost always say, oh, this is what I meant. This is what I was trying to say. So your role as a marketer is that of an editor. In fact, Ira Glass said that one of the things that they're most proud of is their editing, is what they do. That's the thing we don't experience. And that's the thing you don't want your audience to experience, but you and your team need to understand that editing is the most important part of your storytelling process. Michael Crichton said that stories aren't written, they're rewritten. They're rewritten. And I know we live in a fast-paced world, and I know that business moves at such a rapid click that the thing that you don't have time for is this. But because of the evergreen nature of the stories that we write, because they live on and because they can keep working for your brand, we have to make the time to do this. So it takes a lot of hard work. It does take a lot of hard work. Now, a couple of last tips. When is it important to tell stories? Moshe Hamid wrote The Reluctant Fundamentalist. He had an article in Fast Company. I encourage you to go check it out. He said there were 3 times we need novelists. That is, all companies need novelists, first of all. But they need it so that everyone can grab a unifying narrative. But they really need novelists at birth, when there's new leadership, and when there's difficult growing. Now, where do you find great stories in your organization? There's all kinds of places to find them. You just have to turn your Wi-Fi signal on. You just have to keep that on all the time. If you're in a meeting with your team, if you're talking with customers, obviously, but you can find them estimating and quoting. I find that great stories are in the pipeline early because you can capture that whole narrative with the customer as they go through the experience. Within the 4 walls of your business, the virtual 4 walls, what new customers, what made them say yes, foundational customers. Some of my best stories that I love are mistakes and recovery. Mistakes and recovery really show what a brand is about. And I love mistakes and recovery stories. Here's the thing, is that the thing that you need to, or would want to do, is to bake into your organization the responsibility that storytelling is everyone's responsibility. It's not marketing's responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility. David Carr, the famous journalist who mentored most of the famous journalists we know today, said this once: stop coming in my office telling stories and start coming in here bringing stories. I think that applies to everyone on your team. Like, let's start sharing these stories and creating a culture of sharing stories. Storytelling is everyone's responsibility. Remember, every order sold is a story waiting to be told. Every single order sold is a story waiting to be told. I don't care if it's the smallest order in your building or the largest order of your year. All right, we have a few minutes here. I'm going to share you one more story and show you just a few final tips, and then we'll take some questions, okay?
When I was a child, I was crazy about looking at planes flying. And as soon as I could, I was flying kites. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a pilot. I just want to fly. And I don't just want to buy things to get me in the air. I want to make them. I set up my workshop in an old dairy building at home, and eventually it grew too big for the farm. At the very beginning, every logistics company we used, we found problems with braking equipment, things weren't turning up on time. Then I met Rachel from UPS, and it was absolutely night and day. I found that she not only solved many of our problems, she prevented them, like helping us with our packaging so they'd get to our customers in perfect condition. We've shipped machines to Brazil, a tiny village in Africa, even Zanzibar. You want it to be looked after on its way because you're putting your life on this thing. We build flying machines, but what we deliver is seeing the world from a new perspective. The sky is endless, and it's ours. We just don't use it like we can. It's my life's passion to make sure we do. I'm Jailo Cardese, maker and designer of the Parajet flying machines.
Isn't that beautiful? You know what I love about that? The thing I love the most about that is that UPS is sort of a grimy, dirty logistics business. It's not an elegant business, and yet, and it's incredibly complex. But there was a line in there where he said, "Then I met Rachel from UPS," and it was such a great connection because now you can see going back to the hero's journey and your responsibility as the guide, as the mentor. It just unlocks not only how we can serve our customers better, but it unlocks how you can tell that story, or how you can have them tell that story, help them tell that story, share that story better. So it's really important. So Enchanting Secrets, there were 6 of them we shared: connect product with authentic experiences and the aspirational self. To find the story, solve the problem, and choose the perspective. Number 3, solving the problem leads to discovering the transformation. Number 4, momentum and motion and meaning. Number 5, the flame is emotion. Without it, it's a boring case history. And number 6, stories aren't written, they're rewritten. And we showed 4 story shapes: the Kurt Vonnegut of data visualization, the hero's journey, the Pixar method, and then we showed This American Life. So I hope this has been very helpful for you. And the thing I want to leave you with, the most importantly, is just remember that good marketing requires fearlessness. All right. Thank you, guys. I hope that was helpful.
Bobby, thanks for an awesome presentation. I was just reading chat, and Mark chimed in. I have to scroll back up because all the chats are coming in. Mark says, "This has been a brilliant webinar. It's the best I've joined in well over a year." And I meant to reply to Mark directly, and I replied to everyone. So everyone saw my response. Mark, thank you so much. That's awesome. Remember, if you guys have questions for Bobby, post them in the Q&A. We are going to kick things off with a lightning round. We have about 6 minutes. We're going to get through as many as we can. You ready?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. So one of the things that we want to know is something you talked about late in the presentation about making storytelling everyone's responsibility, not just marketers. Yeah. How do we do that? Because typically in organizations, we're pushed back on, well, that's marketing's job. I have to sell. I have to do finance. I have to run the business. I don't have time to tell stories. That's marketing's job. You do it. Yeah. How do we break folks out of that mold, out of that mindset?
I think by painting a picture of what that's going to look like for your team and getting with the integral people that are at front lines. So customer service folks that are on the phone with the customer, first discover what that front line is and we understand they're busy too. But I think if you spend some time with the right people in your organization and you understand where the customer is communicating the most, where they're talking the most, that's typically where your best stories are going to come from. You have to bake within, and this is hard, but you have to bake within the organization the fact that storytelling is everyone's responsibilities. But get the key folks involved, spend some time with them, like going over some of the details of this presentation and saying, look, how do we make this important? How do we get more stories? Are we appointing key people within the organization in every department to bring those stories? Are they in the meetings with their Wi-Fi signal on and they're bringing those to marketing? The thing is, marketing, our job is to craft the story. We're typically not the ones that are going to spot the best story, not always, but we can get spotters on our organization, and that would help. So I think the idea is just create some spotters, get some folks involved in multiple departments. Start with one or two departments, and then let them feed that back to you.
I really like what you said near the end, and you've said this before on webinars, and you actually gave a workshop to us here at Marketing Profs. But every deal sold is a story waiting to be told, and we have at Marketing Profs, when a sale happens, we have an email that goes out company wide. And every single time I see one of these, I think back to what you said, and I think back to that because it is so true. I mean, even if you aren't sure where to go for your stories, how to begin crafting, right there is a great jumping off point, because you can go to the sales team who closed that deal. You can talk through that process, or better yet, if marketing is involved from the get-go, you have that background and the impetus to start that.
Yeah. 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 Matt, one time we had a $150 order with the marketing business that I ran that came through, and it was one of the best stories that I loved. The story, the sale itself was really not that great, but the story behind it was phenomenal. So yeah, you're right. It's a fun way to think, instead of thinking, because I think we look for the melodramatic moments.
You do, yes.
And that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the average moments that we can turn, that we can sort of extract. We're the storytellers, so we will extract out of that moment all of the emotion, all the intensity, all the tension, the drama, the action, and the movement. We don't need melodramatic stories. We just need stories, period.
Questions are coming in hot and heavy, guys. We're not going to be able to get to all of them because they are come flooding in. So I want to say thank you all to asking these, but we're going to go through as many as we can. Nico asks us, do you have a top 3 resources for storytelling or writing a story that are kind of your go-to things that you think everyone needs to read or look at?
This is that, Nico, this is that question that I knew I needed to come to you. And what happens with me, Matt and I talk about this, is that I think of about 20 resources and then my brain just goes. George Saunders has a book. I'm literally using it as a mic stand because I'm reading it right now, called, well, look at this, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. Here, let's just see. Here's the book. And this is my signed copy that I'm destroying by writing it everywhere. But it's that is one book that I recommend. Just came out not too long ago, and it's on short storytelling. It's a little bit of it's a big book, but it's worth it. I also recommend marketers in particular. Anne does this, and I do this too, and that is that every morning start the day with poetry. I know that's crazy. The recommendation, the reason why I bring it up, we need to, because we work in language all the time, we need to remember the potency of language and the inspiration of language. And I think it's a great place for you to start. But as far as storytelling goes, Joseph Campbell's work on the hero's journey is a great place to start. George Saunders' work, study the storytellers though. I think we need to bring more of the craft outside, that's happening outside of our business world in. So everything you're doing entertainment. I hope what this webinar does for you is that you can't see anything or watch anything anymore without it processing through the filter of how do I tell this story.
All right, so we've got time for one more, and we had a couple people ask about this. We saw the UPS example at the end. So when we're talking about B2B, when we're talking about making the customer the hero of that story in a B2B instance, are we making our potential clients the hero, or are we focusing on the customers of our clients? How many layers down should we be focusing on this from a B2B standpoint?
It's a great question. I would need to know a little bit more about their business, but here's what I think now. When I originally started talking about storytelling, I said we should focus on the customer's journey only. And then I realized that we need to impact every audience, and that includes the customer's customer. So it's hard work, but I think we have our business story to tell. You think about different perspectives. You have the community story to tell. You have the customer story to tell. You have the customer's customers. There's all kinds of ways you can use that. But I think the unfortunate answer is all of them are important. Probably where you spend lion's share of your time is with the customer and the brand. And then you look at what other audiences that you can find to tell a story about.
All right.